our latest preaching series, we've been looking at what we call going over the wall. And what that means is how to live as a Christian the rest of the time that we're not in this building. The rest of the time where the rubber hits the road, as they say. The time when we're not cocooned, because church should be a bit of a cocoon. Church should be a time that we can refresh, that we can be ourselves, that we can worship God freely, that we can talk to people without risk of someone laughing or saying, "You what? How can you believe that?" Church meeting together should be an oasis in the desert, even if it's a little bit like Waterloo Station at the same time. So today I'm going to share about my life, my communities, where I have to be a Christian. And it basically splits into 3 communities. There's my home and my family. Sometimes the hardest place. There's the school up the road. And for me, my community and where I work is also church. And that's quite a difficult thing for me. I've always come to church, I've always believed in church, I've always been part of a church. And to make church part of my job was actually quite difficult. Because all of you, all of us contribute to church. All of us work in the church. All of us are involved in the church. To make it work for me, I have to also allocate some hours to it. The not so interesting stuff. The accounts. I know some people apparently find that interesting. Lucy? The fact that I have to be at every event, whether I want to or not. And I generally have to be the last to leave. So it's kind of balancing, but I don't ever want church to ever just be a job to me. Because that would be very sad. So my three communities. I work roughly 25 hours at the school. But anyone who works in school is fully aware that it just eats into your life. You feel like you've sold your soul. You can't kind of keep it in this little box, even if you've got somewhere else to be. And I roughly give 20 working hours to church as well. But that involves things like running a football club for the school. Includes things like food bank. It sometimes includes cleaning. Although we're beginning to get a bit of a team. Thank you, Leanne, Laura, Paula. It's not something that comes naturally to me. So, before I talk about what I do, and before we think about what we do, I think it's really important to think about who we are before what we do. We are sons and daughters of God. The God who made the whole universe, who flung the stars into space, holds us in the palm of his hand. God loved us so much that he sent his own son to die for us. We are special to him. We cannot earn his love. He loved us while we were still far away from him. The verse said he loved us while we were still sinners. I kind of find that can be a bit separatist. He loved us before we knew him. And he covers our sin with his grace. Anything we do should be as a response to that. One of my favourite verses simply says, we love because he first loved us. It's important to hold on to who we are and why we do things. We can get lost in this world, pulled around, dragged into things we don't want to do, behaving in a way we might not want to behave, seeing things we might not want to see, being part of things we don't want to be part of. And one of the challenges that I face in school is being nice all the time. And I really mean all the time. Because they are watching me. 30 staff are watching me. 200 children are watching me. And I need God in me to be nice all of the time. Some of the time. Any of the time. My inspirational verse comes from Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 to 16. It says, you, meaning us Christians, we are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand. And it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. It's kind of nice that people think I'm a nice person. At school they do. They do think I'm calm and nice and reliable and all of those things. But actually it's more important that they see what I do and think, wow, she's a Christian. That's what makes the difference. I wasn't just born tolerant. I had a nickname as a child, it was Tiger. Work it out. So the staff at school know I'm a Christian, and sometimes I do get to talk about it. The Christian reason for something, or my view for something. But I know that the most effective witness I have is who I am and the role that I do. So I am the school listener. This is a role created for me by the head teacher. I am there to listen to and care for all the children, all the staff, and all the parents connected to our school. I am there for the children. Children that have friendship issues, anger issues, anxiety, going through family breakup, their pets died, whatever. I'm there for them. They can come and see me any time they want. They just knock on my door. Preferably not during maths and English. Does annoy the teachers. But they can come and see me. A teacher can say, can you have a word with this child? A parent can ask. Anyone can ask. And I know every child in that school by name. All 200 of them. Even reception, which usually takes me longer, but they're quite a challenging class this year. And I speak and spend time individually with around 50 of them a week. And that's pretty good. But it is nothing compared to how well our Heavenly Father knows us, his children. Luke 12:7 tells us that even the hairs on our head are numbered. Psalm 139 reminds us that God knew us. He created us in our innermost being. He knitted us together in our mother's womb. All the days ordained for us are written in his book before one of them came to be. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. The children are one thing, the staff are another. The staff, in today's environment in school, in teaching, it's hard. It's a tough job. And sometimes in the stresses of the day, they can get hurt. Teachers can feel hurt, they can feel undervalued, they can feel under pressure, they can feel, what on earth am I doing in this place? And my job is to be there as a peacemaker, to build them up, to encourage them. I believe God is a God of peace, and we are called to bring peace into our communities. Not add to the stress, bring peace. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. And sometimes teachers do have a whinge, usually about another teacher, or the head teacher. And they'll say to me, well, after all, you are the school listener. And that's They wanted to call me counsellor, but I'm not qualified. So we stick within the guidelines. But I am there to listen and to offer counsel to everyone connected to the school. I'm also what they call the family liaison officer. And in this role, I'm there to support the parents of the kids. In many ways, the roles go together. I am there to help the parents if they need extra support, financial, emotional, practical, and yes, sometimes spiritual. They wouldn't call it that, but sometimes spiritual. And I'm often the bridge between the parent and the teacher, or the parent and the head teacher. And I work with them if they're struggling with their children's behaviour or emotional well-being, putting in touch with the various agencies that should be there to help. And this means, in reality, fighting their corner, helping them stand up for their rights. I'm not there to judge people, but to help them. And there's a lot in the Bible about not judging, especially in church. We cannot set ourselves up as a perfect example of godliness and good behaviour and sit in judgment on all who fall short of my standards. We cannot do that. God clearly says in Romans 3 that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus. It's a level playing field. We all need Jesus. And I've had to pray a lot about that because I still believe there is right and wrong behaviour. Especially at school in my safeguarding role for the children. Sometimes people are wrong. They are behaving wrong. And we need to protect people from it. But as Christians, we have to guard our hearts against anger or bitterness, self-righteousness, or a critical spirit. I believe we are called to make judgments, but not to be judgmental. And I find that hard. I've really have to pray about that. How to make a right judgment without turning judgmental. All of my adult life, I've been involved in fighting the cause of the underdog and those unable to deal with hard and difficult circumstances. And Micah 6 verse 8 came up at Rick's, comes up at mine, is an important bedrock to me living out my faith. He has shown you what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. I believe to act justly also means to see justice done. Also means to stand up and see justice done. And many of us here work at Food Bank, another part of my week. And this is a place where that Bible verse springs into action. There's so much in the Bible about helping the poor, looking after widows and their children, and standing up for the oppressed. We cannot ignore those people marginalised by our society. We cannot ignore those people struggling in a hurting and damaged world. And Food Bank is more than simply feeding people. It's a place where people are listened to, prayed for, shown love and respect. I find that so often the church gets criticised for what it does do or doesn't do or does believe or does whatever. People love to criticise the church, don't they? But I tell you, Food Bank is the inspiration of the church. And many good things throughout history have been the inspiration of Christians. The NHS was the inspiration of Christians. And so we need to, and I put those of you that follow Facebook, I put a thing on my Facebook. You know, the church feeds people. It has the best debt account services, you know, sorting out people's debts of the whole country. It's got the best network of that. Christians are more and more standing in the gap that is being left by our government. And we need to be proud of that. We need to say that. I'm not interested in what someone thinks the church believes about anything. I'm interested in what they see the church do. So we need to hold on to that. As Christians, we're also told to look after our families, up and down the generations. My mum and dad are getting older. My dad is 81. He has dementia. My mum cares for him and my younger brother who has cerebral palsy. We are the only family left on the island to look after them. And it's good that Tony and I agree on this, because it can be quite hard work and quite challenging to look after elderly relatives. The Bible clearly says in 1 Timothy, I think we found it 5 verse 3, give proper recognition to those widows, and I'd put in there vulnerable people who are really in need. But if a widow or vulnerable person has children or grandchildren, these should first of all put their religion into practice by caring for their own family, and so repaying their parents and grandparents, for this is pleasing to God. There's a challenge for us all. And to the individual Christian, verse 8 goes on to say, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Now, I'm aware everyone will be in different situations with their families, and I'm happy to chat afterwards. But it is a verse that spoke to me and spoke to Tony when we were finding some things difficult. And it's good to know that God knew that would happen. So I believe it means more than money. It means our love and our time. Family was God's idea, and we need to be able to honour that. So the other half of my working week is within the church, and I believe in church, I always have. Jesus believes in church too. He said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not overcome it. And when Tony and I were called to lead a church, my attitude and involvement in it didn't really change. I have been to church since I was 4 years old. I carried on in church when we were all allowed to leave at 12. I come from a non-Christian family, and it was the only Christian family I had going to church, and I think that's why I valued it. I don't think sometimes we value church enough, but it was the place where I could go and be a Christian, in a place where I could worship God, a place I could learn from others, a place I could be accepted for believing what I believed. The Bible talks a lot about everyone having a role in church. And sometimes we confuse that with job. It's a role. It's part of what we bring to our family. And Romans 12 verse 6 says we have different gifts according to the grace given to us. If your gift is prophesying, then prophesy with accordance to your faith. If it is serving, then serve. If it is teaching, then teach. If it is to encourage, then give encouragement. If it is to give, then give generously. If it is to lead, do it diligently. If it is to show mercy, do it cheerfully. I think that pretty much covers everything in church. Encouraging people is an amazing role to have in church. It's all right. Smiling at people, helping people is an amazing role. Just as important as standing up and preaching, and probably harder. In other places, different gifts are listed. Apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, workers of miracles, people who have gifts of healing, helping others, gifts of administration. I love that. God's very practical. God knows that somebody has to count the money and put it in the bank. God knows that somebody has to send off various things to headquarters. I read that to myself every night. Gifts of administration, gifts of administration. Happy to share. And some speak in different kinds of tongues. It's all lumped in with God, isn't it? It's us that kind of put the who's better than anybody else, what's more important than anything else. With God, it's all lumped in together. We are part of the church. But we are very busy, and getting to the church is very hard. In 2007, it's about 10 years ago now, isn't it? I went away to my one and only Christian conference without my husband. It was a bit of a girls' treat in London to Hillsongs. I went with two very good friends. But I was struggling at the time. My biggest struggle was my role in church versus my role in school. That is still a problem, because they're both equal and valid, in my opinion. But, I've only got so many hours a week. But God spoke to me very, very, very clearly that day. And he said to me, you are a pastor. That's not a pastor with a capital P. I am not. Well, Tony and I pastor this church. Tony is the pastor of the church. I am a pastor. It's who I am. In all areas of my life, including church and school, I am a pastor. I am someone who's called to lead, to care, to nurture people. And that word has stayed with me through some very, very difficult times. I've been asked several times at school why I don't join in some of the more negative sides of working with a bunch of women. You can imagine. Or why I don't fight fire with fire. Someone has a go at you, you have a go back, Why don't I do that? And I realised, hanging on to that word from God, it's because it's not who I am. Who I am is someone that needs to be calm, needs to be approachable, needs to be forgiving, needs to be loving. Because let's face it, that's why they employed me. And I've said that to my head teacher. I had trouble with a member of staff. I could have eaten her for breakfast if I wanted to. Quick-witted, I could have done it. But actually that would have changed who I was in that place. It would have turned me into someone that I really shouldn't be. And they would tell me every day afterwards, I'm sure. So it's about being who we are. And it's important for each of us to find out who we are and where we fit into the church. Time is precious and we are constantly squeezed. For me, being a leader in an administrative, that's the word, and pastoral role in this church is God's calling. And I have to make time available to do that. So I decided to split my working week. 20 hours to church, 20 to school. It's nothing to do with money. Tony and I, between us, aren't paid 3/4 of what is recommended as a pastor. It was to do with if I didn't give myself a job and say I owe the church 20 hours, the church would never get it. It would be squeezed. But the school would get it. So that's why I made that distinction. And I think for all of us, we have to make that distinction in our mind. It has to be a decision to come to church. It has to be a decision to be involved in church. It has to be a decision to give our gift into church. Even if you artificially, work out your working week and you put it in there somehow. It's the only way I could deal with it. Many of you have to work out your calling in a world that shouts for our attention. For some of us, this will mean doing more in the church meetings. For others, it will mean receiving support at the church meetings in order to better witness in our overwhelming jobs or family situations. And that will differ throughout our life. Some people have such overwhelming jobs that they cannot physically cope with anything else. Some people have medical conditions, they cannot physically cope with anything else. Some people have family situations, they cannot mentally fit anything else in their brain. And that's where the rest of us as a church offer the support. And when times change for those people, they will offer other support. That's what families do. So in no way does anybody need to feel that I'm getting at you. That's not the way this is meant to come across. It's meant to come across as, what can I do when I can do it, in the time that I have to do it. And it's good because it all changes. You know, every week on a Sunday, somebody's back here. Might not be the same people. Somebody will pick up the Hoover and do it. Somebody will pick up the slack, but it might not be the same person. The important thing is to make a time to come to church and let God work through us and in us. And as a church body, we want to support Christians to be the best that we can as we all go over the wall into our communities. Wow, that's the end.